Elena had learned long ago that love was both beautiful and cruel. She hadn't always known she had a gift, if it could even be called that. The first time it happened, she had been 15. She'd met a boy at a summer camp, and when their eyes locked for exactly 10 seconds, her vision blurred, and a flood of images filled her mind. Their love story had been sweet and innocent, but it ended with him leaving, choosing someone else. Since then, it had happened over and over. Strangers, friends, even random couples in public. If she looked into someone's eyes for exactly 10 seconds, she would see their entire love story unfold. Every touch, every tear, every last word before it was over. Some stories were happy. Most weren't. So, she had trained herself to avoid it. No eye contact. Never long enough. Never more than a glance. But then came him. It was a quiet afternoon in a small coffee shop. The air smelled of roasted beans and vanilla, soft jazz playing in the background. Elena sat by the window, absent-mindedly stirring her cappuccino, lost in thought. And then he walked in. Dark, tousled hair, a strong jawline, and an easy confidence as he ordered his drink. He looked familiar, yet she knew she had never seen him before. She hadn't realized she was staring until he turned. Their eyes met. Her heart jolted. She should have looked away, but something about his gaze held her still. 1 second. His eyes were warm, deep, like a story waiting to be told. 2 seconds. She could break the connection. She should. 3 seconds. A slow, knowing smile tugged at his lips. 4. It was too late. 5. 6. 7. The world around her blurred. 8. 9. 10. And then the vision hit her. Flashes of laughter, whispered confessions under a city skyline, fingers entwined in candlelight. She saw stolen kisses, late-night talks, a love so breathtaking it made her heart ache. But then, pain, desperation, a hospital room. One of them was holding the other's hand, tears falling onto pale skin. And then nothing. Elena gasped, her body jerking as she snapped back into reality. The coffee shop came rushing back, the clinking of cups, the quiet chatter, the warmth of sunlight streaming through the window. He was still looking at her, brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was smooth, laced with genuine worry. Elena swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this story now. She knew how it ended. And she had to make a choice. Walk away now or fall in love, knowing only one of them would survive. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped her coffee cup, her mind still spinning from the vision. She had seen so many love stories before, some ending in heartbreak, others in quiet contentment. But this one was different. Because she was in it. Because one of them wouldn't make it to the end. "Are you okay?" the man asked again, concern deepening in his voice. Elena forced a breath, grounding herself in the present. The coffee shop was the same, the people around them unchanged. But she was different now. She knew a secret about this man that even he didn't. She should leave. Right now. Walk away before she got too close. Before the story had a chance to begin. But instead, she found herself asking, "What's your name?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but then he smiled. Adrian. Adrian. The name felt familiar already, like she had known it all her life. "I'm Elena," she said before she could stop herself. And just like that, the choice was made. For the rest of the afternoon, Elena told herself that she wasn't falling into fate's trap. She was simply talking to a stranger. Nothing more. Adrian was easy to talk to. He had a natural charm, the kind that didn't feel rehearsed or forced. He made her laugh, his quick wit catching her off guard more than once. "So, what were you thinking about before I caught you staring?" he teased, sipping his coffee. Elena hesitated. "You, your future, our love, and how one of us dies." She forced a smile. "Nothing important." His eyes studied her for a moment, as if trying to read between the lines. But then he let it go. They talked for hours, the sun slowly sinking behind the city skyline. And with every passing second, Elena's resolve wavered. She should walk away. She should never see him again. But when Adrian finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "I'd love to see you again." Elena's heart ached. She had seen how beautiful their love would be. And she had seen how it would end. This was her last chance. Say no, and she could escape the inevitable pain. But she had already made her choice the moment she looked into his eyes. "Me too," she whispered. And just like that, their story began. Elena told herself that one meeting wouldn't change anything. She could walk away anytime. She could stop replying to his messages, avoid the places he might be, and let their story fade before it truly began. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself waiting for his texts, smiling at his good morning messages, and laughing at his terrible jokes. She was falling, and she knew it. Days turned into weeks, and before she realized it, Adrian had become a part of her life. They spent evenings exploring the city, their footsteps echoing on cobblestone streets. He took her to hidden bookstores, to late-night food stalls, to secret spots where the skylines stretched endlessly before them. And each moment was exactly as she had seen in the vision. Every touch, every smile, every stolen kiss. One evening, they sat by the river, watching the lights flicker on the water. Adrian leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the sky. "I feel like I've known you forever," he said softly. Elena swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. He had no idea how true that was. "Maybe we met in another life," she joked, forcing a lightness into her tone. Adrian turned his head, studying her with those deep, unreadable eyes. "Then I hope I found you in every one of them." Her heart clenched, because in this life, she had already seen how their story would end. And she was helpless to stop it. Elena had always believed in free will, that people made their own choices, shaped their own futures. But with Adrian, she was beginning to doubt that. Because no matter what she did, their story was unfolding exactly as she had seen. The first time she felt it, truly felt it, was a rainy afternoon when Adrian showed up at her doorstep, drenched from head to toe. "I was in the area," he said with a sheepish smile. "And I remembered you like the sound of rain." Her heart stuttered, because she had seen this before. She remembered the vision of him standing at her door, shaking water from his hair, grinning as if he belonged there. She had thought it was just a dream, something too perfect to be real. But it was real. It was happening. And suddenly she was terrified. She let him in, draping a towel over his shoulders. "You're insane," she muttered, shaking her head as he sat on her couch. Adrian just shrugged. "Maybe. But it got me a cup of your famous hot chocolate, didn't it?" Elena rolled her eyes but went to the kitchen anyway. She wasn't sure when she had started remembering his favorite things, how he liked his coffee black, how he hated cucumbers, how his right hand always fidgeted when he was nervous. As she stirred the cocoa, her hands trembled. This was one of their moments. One of the moments that had played in her vision, their love story coming to life, piece by piece. But no matter how beautiful these moments were, she couldn't forget the ending. She walked back into the living room and handed him the mug. His fingers brushed against hers, lingering just a second too long. "Elena," he murmured. She looked up, startled by the softness in his voice. "You seem distant sometimes," he admitted. "Like you're here, but part of you is somewhere else." Her chest tightened. "I know how our story ends, Adrian. I know what's coming." She forced a smile. "I guess I just think too much." Adrian chuckled. "Then I'll just have to keep you distracted." And before she could say anything, he leaned in. Soft, warm, inevitable. His lips met hers, and for the first time since she had seen their future, she let herself forget. Forget the fear. Forget the tragedy. Forget the weight of knowing what was coming. In that moment, there was only them. From that night on, Elena started paying attention. To the tiny details. To the warnings. She thought, foolishly, that maybe she could outsmart fate. Maybe if she did things differently, if she made different choices, she could change the ending. So, she started testing fate. In the vision, Adrian had always picked up coffee from a small cafe near his work. The next morning, She asked him to meet her at a different cafe on the other side of the city. She watched him carefully, waiting to see if the change had any effect. Nothing happened. Another time, she deliberately avoided a place they were supposed to visit, a bookstore where she had seen them spending an entire afternoon together. But the next day, Adrian showed up at her door, a book in hand. "I saw this and thought of you," he said, handing it to her. It was the exact book he had bought her in the vision. No matter what she did, the universe course-corrected. Every kiss, every touch, every moment. The story refused to change. And every step forward brought her closer to the inevitable. The first real sign of the tragedy came on a night that should have been perfect. Elena and Adrian had spent the entire day together, wandering through a street market, hand in hand. She had tried to push away the dread, tried to pretend that their story wasn't already written. But then, as they crossed the street near her apartment, a car sped past, so fast, so close that Adrian had to yank her out of the way. The headlights blurred, the sound of screeching tires echoing in her ears. For a second, her breath caught. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But then the car was gone, and Adrian was holding her, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. "Elena," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but inside, panic churned in her chest. This hadn't been part of the vision. Had she changed something? Had she interfered too much? Or worse, was the universe adjusting? Elena spent the next few weeks caught in a silent war. She wanted to love Adrian without fear, to believe in the present instead of the future. But the weight of knowing never left her. And then, one evening, as they lay in bed, tangled in the warmth of each other, Adrian whispered, "I love you." Elena felt her heart break, because she couldn't say it back. Not because she didn't feel it. God, she did. But because saying it felt like sealing their fate. Like accepting that they were already running toward an ending she couldn't stop. So instead, she buried her face in his chest, holding on to him like she could somehow keep him here. Adrian didn't push. He just kissed the top of her head, as if he already knew she needed time. But time was the one thing she didn't have. Elena didn't know when it would happen. The vision had never told her the exact day, the exact hour. Only that it was coming. And so, she started memorizing everything about him. The way he laughed. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The way he always reached for her hand, as if he needed the reassurance that she was there. She told herself she could prepare for the pain. That she could make memories strong enough to last beyond the ending. But deep down, she knew nothing would ever be enough. Elena had never been more aware of time. Every second with Adrian felt precious, slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. She spent each day watching him, memorizing him, waiting for the moment when fate would finally catch up. But waiting for a tragedy was its own kind of torment. She barely slept, waking up in the middle of the night just to check if he was still breathing beside her. She held him tighter, as if her grip alone could keep him safe. Adrian noticed the change. "You've been different lately," he murmured one night as they lay in bed. Elena swallowed hard. "Different how?" Adrian traced a lazy pattern on her wrist. "Like you're afraid of something." She forced a smile. "I'm not afraid." It was a lie. She was terrified. Elena kept trying to change things. She planned different dates, took new routes home, made sure he never walked near roads alone at night. But the feeling never left. A quiet, suffocating certainty. And then one evening, Adrian suggested something that sent ice through her veins. "There's a cabin a few hours from the city," he said over dinner. "Let's take a trip. Just you and me." Elena's fork clattered against her plate. A cabin. In her vision there had been snow. A frozen lake. A place surrounded by trees.
And a goodbye.
She gripped the edge of the table, trying to keep herself from shaking. "Adrian, I don't think we should go." He frowned, setting down his glass. "Why not?" "Because I've already seen how this ends. Because I can't lose you." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Let's stay here. I like it here." Adrian searched her face, his brow furrowed. "Elena, talk to me." She wanted to. She wanted to tell him everything, to beg him to trust her, to never leave the city. But what could she say? That she had seen their love story before it even started? That she had watched him die? She bit her lip, forcing herself to smile. I just don't want to go. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand back. Okay, he said softly. Relief flooded her. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally changed something. But the universe was cruel. A week later, Adrian called her late at night. I need to go, he said, his voice urgent. My friend got into an accident near the cabin. He's alone. I have to help him. Elena's blood ran cold. No, she whispered. Elena, I don't have time to argue. He could be hurt. Don't go, she pleaded, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had stopped him before. She had changed things. But if he went now… Elena, Adrian said gently, I'll be back before you know it. The moment she heard those words, she knew. This was it. The moment everything led to. Her vision hadn't changed, just the path leading to it. Her pulse pounded as she scrambled to grab her coat. Wait, I'm coming with you. There was a pause. Then Adrian sighed. You hate the cold. I don't care. He hesitated, then finally gave in. Okay, I'll pick you up in 10. She hung up and closed her eyes. Maybe this time, she could stop it. Maybe this time, she could save him. The drive to the cabin was quiet. Elena kept sneaking glances at Adrian, drinking in every detail, the curve of his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the steering wheel, the warmth in his gaze when he looked at her. This wasn't fair. She had barely begun loving him, and fate was already trying to take him away. When they arrived, the road was slick with ice. The trees loomed around them, their branches heavy with snow. Adrian parked the car and grabbed his phone. Let me check on him. Then everything shifted. A bright light. The sound of tires skidding. Elena barely had time to react before a truck came barreling down the icy road. It was going too fast. Too fast. She saw Adrian turn, saw his eyes widen in shock, and in that split second she knew. She made a choice. She grabbed Adrian and pushed him as hard as she could. He fell back, slipping onto the ice, safe. But she wasn't. Elena barely had time to gasp before the truck hit her.
Pain.
That was the first thing she felt. The second was cold. Snow against her skin. Ice beneath her body. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Adrian screaming her name. She blinked up at the night sky, breath coming in shallow gasps. The stars above her were endless, stretching across the heavens like shattered glass. This wasn't how the vision had gone. She had changed it, but the story had needed an ending, and it had taken her instead. She felt warmth, Adrian's hands pressing against her, his voice shaking. Elena, stay with me. Stay with me. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But the darkness was already creeping in, pulling at the edges of her vision. Elena, please, Adrian begged. I love you. She smiled, even as tears slipped down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. And then she let go. It was the first thing Adrian felt when Elena's body went still in his arms. A raw, aching pain that tore through his chest like an open wound. No, no, no. His hands trembled as he cradled her face, willing her to open her eyes. Her skin was cold, too cold. The snow around them was painted red, and her breath, God, her breath was gone. The night was silent except for his ragged sobs. Somewhere in the distance, headlights flickered. The driver of the truck was yelling, stumbling out, calling for help. But Adrian couldn't hear any of it. All he could see was her. The woman who had saved him. The woman who had loved him enough to change fate itself. And now she was gone. Elena had always loved books with tragic endings. He had teased her about it once, playfully rolling his eyes whenever she chose a novel that would leave her in tears. Why do you love heartbreak so much? He'd asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because, she had whispered with a sad smile, it means the love was real. He had laughed then, not understanding. But now he understood. Because this heartbreak was real. And it was killing him. Adrian barely remembered the moments after. The ambulance, the hospital, the cold, sterile halls. The way people spoke in hushed voices, offering him condolences like empty words could ever fill the void she left behind. He sat beside her hospital bed, gripping her hand even though he knew she wasn't coming back. "I was supposed to die," he whispered, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "Not you. Never you." He squeezed his eyes shut. What was the point of love if it always ended like this? If fate was always cruel, always unforgiving? Adrian clenched his jaw.
No.
He wouldn't let this be their ending. Days passed, then weeks. Adrian couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He moved through life like a ghost, haunted by the weight of what should have been. Everywhere he went, he saw her. At the coffee shop where they first met. On the park bench where she had laughed under golden autumn leaves. In his apartment, where the ghost of her touch still lingered on his skin. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the accident. The way she had pushed him away. The way she had taken his place. His hands curled into fists. Fate had taken her. But what if he could take her back? It was impossible, wasn't it? But then, one night, as he sat in the darkness of his apartment, staring at the last photo he had of her, something shifted. A whisper in the back of his mind. A memory. Something Elena once told him. Love stories don't always have happy endings, Adrian. Elena's words echoed in his mind, looping like a cruel melody he couldn't silence. But what if they didn't have to end? He wasn't the type to believe in miracles, but Elena had seen the future. She had glimpsed fate and tried to outrun it. So what if he could do the same? His search for answers became an obsession. He scoured old books, chased whispers of myths, poured through histories of people who claimed to have seen the past and the future. Every legend, every folk tale, he read them all. Most were meaningless. Fairy tales for desperate people. But then he found one story that changed everything. There was an old belief, buried deep in forgotten texts, about those who died before their love story was truly written. It was said that if a love ended too soon, if it was stolen before it could reach its final page, then the thread of that story was never fully woven into fate. And if a person was willing to risk everything, they could find the unfinished thread and pull it back. But there was always a price. A sacrifice. Adrian exhaled shakily, staring down at the passage he had translated 3 times just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. It couldn't be real. But neither should Elena's ability have been real. Neither should the fact that she had seen his death and instead had taken his place. If fate was something she had defied, then so would he. The journey led him far from the city, to a place whispered about in forgotten circles. A ruined chapel stood in the middle of nowhere, its stone walls crumbling, its altar covered in vines. This was the place the stories had spoken of. The place where time bled into itself. Adrian stepped inside, his breath forming a cloud in the freezing air. A dim glow flickered ahead. Candles, still burning despite the absence of any living soul. And then he saw it. A single red thread, stretched between 2 cracked pillars. It pulsed with something ancient. Something that whispered of stolen love, of time unraveled, of stories that had tried to resist their endings. Adrian didn't hesitate. He reached out and pulled. And the world broke apart. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no air, just an endless abyss of time folding in on itself. Then suddenly, he was back. The cold air of winter hit him first. The scent of pine and frost. The weight of his coat on his shoulders. And in front of him, Elena. She was standing on the icy road, exactly where she had been that night. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted in shock. She was alive. Adrian's heart nearly stopped. But then he heard the sound, tires skidding. The truck was coming. Adrian didn't think. He moved. This time, he was the one who pushed. Elena gasped as he shoved her out of the way, her body hitting the snow just as the blinding headlights swallowed him whole.
Pain.
It tore through him like fire and ice, a sharp, unbearable agony. But even as his vision blurred, even as the cold seeped into his bones, he smiled. Because he had done it. He had changed the ending. Elena was alive. And that was all that mattered. Elena woke up in a hospital bed. For a moment, her mind was blank, just a haze of white walls, the soft beeping of machines, the distant hum of voices outside the door. Then, memory crashed into her like a tidal wave. The road. The truck. Adrian. She bolted upright, ignoring the sharp ache in her ribs. Where is he? The nurse startled, rushing to steady her. Miss, you need to lie down. Where is he? Footsteps pounded outside, and then he was there. Adrian, standing in the doorway.
Alive.
Elena's breath hitched. His arm was in a sling, bandages wrapped around his forehead, his body bruised and battered. But he was there. Tears blurred her vision. But how? Adrian stepped forward, reaching for her hand. His grip was warm, real. I changed it, he whispered, voice rough with emotion. I changed our story. Elena stared at him, realization washing over her like sunlight breaking through a storm. The future she had seen, it was gone. They had rewritten fate. Together. And this time, their love story wouldn't end in tragedy. This time, it was just beginning.